Hey everybody, Hoosier Jedi here with another review for you. This time we are back with season 3 of Star Wars Rebels, and our first episode is called Steps into Shadow. Overall, this is, it's all right stuff. It's as one would expect. A lot of it is set up for the coming season. Now, officially, it's supposed to pick up about 6 months after the end of last season, and fair enough. That's a pretty standard thing for a lot of TV shows these days. So let's just get right into it. So one of the big things that is going to be going on this season is they're introducing into official continuity Grand Admiral Thrawn. And if you're a fan of the previous expanded universe, like I am, Thrawn is quite the big deal. If you ever read the Heir to the Empire series, which is where Thrawn was originally introduced, he was an amazing character. Um, and it looks like they are obviously going to be taking hewing very heavily to how he was portrayed in that series. The one really significant divergence I noticed is actually in the way he's physically depicted. Thrawn is a member of the Chiss. That's his species, and Chiss are typically depicted as just having like completely red eyes. There is no pupils or corneas or anything like that. And here, instead, they are shown as having them. And this is likely just for artistic reasons, just to sort of help express feelings and emotions and things like that. So it's a little bit of a divergence from the lore, but it's an understandable one, and it's one I can let slide pretty easily. Uh, the Chiss are, in fact, actually one of my favorite Star Wars species. Right up there with, in my book, the Zeltrons. I really, really like the Zeltrons a lot. And um, that's one of the reasons why when I was playing Star Wars: The Old Republic, I made a Chiss Imperial agent, and the Imperial Agent story is generally considered to be the best story in the Star Wars: The Old Republic MMO, and you do really seem to get like a little extra bit out of it if you choose to play as a Chiss. But I don't want to spoil it any further than that. But having this species officially brought into continuity makes me very, very happy, and I am very excited about what they're going to be doing with Thrawn. We don't get to see a lot of him this episode, but he does show that very, very strong deductive skill that he has, and his for planning abilities. Obviously, this is going to be quite quite the challenge for our heroes to overcome. Nothing particular to say about Zeb or Sabine or even Hera. They're all pretty much their same usual selves. Apart from the real characterization, the real stuff that's going on there, is this episode really is focused around Ezra. And I do have to say, it's always fun to have Hondo turn up. And listening to him speak Ugnaught was quite amusing. You don't really. Everybody seems to always be speaking English, which is in the Star Wars universe is usually referred to as, I believe, Basic is kind of considered to be the universal language in that most species use to communicate with each other. But of course, these species generally all have their own language as well. Now, what's going on with Ezra, of course, is that he's been filling around with that Sith holocron that he's picked up last season, which seems to have a female voice. People have been speculating that it might belong to Darth Traya, as she's one of the more, probably the most well-known female Sith Lord. Um, there's this ancient female Sith Lord, Zozana, I think was how her name was pronounced. So that kind of character, she's from the comics. That I would think is a possibility, or it could just be an entirely new character that the holocron belongs to. I imagine we'll probably find out. I'd be lying though if I wasn't rooting for it to be Darth Traya, because if you've ever played the original Knights of the Old Republic video games, which of course, inspired the Old Republic MMO. They're really good games, and Darth Traya was a very interesting and very very complex character. It's one of those. It's very interesting where somebody is very, very clearly evil, and yet over the course of the game you come to find yourself caring about them a great deal. And that was one of the kind of the interesting things that was going on with Traya. And there's a lot more I could really say about all of that, but I don't want to spoil those games because, yeah, even though they're kind of old at this point, in terms of storytelling, they still really hold up. I mean, those are easily some of the best Star Wars video games in terms of story that were ever made. So let's see, what else do we have to talk about? Well, the effect of all of this, plus everything that happened to him last season, is that Ezra is dancing a lot closer to the dark side than he was before. Here he's much quicker to anger. He's arrogant. He even seems to take more than a little bit of pleasure in killing some stormtroopers. Now, granted, this was not entirely something that wasn't going on previously, but here he does really seem to be having a little bit more fun with it. Never mind that he's a little bit more ruthless. Like he insists on leaving no witnesses when they're discovered by the mining guild, and his crew, particularly Sabine and Zeb, and Rex sort of stepping in there and saying like, "Look, no, killing these people is pointless. Let's just get the hell out of here." I mean, he does eventually let himself be talked into it, but think about this. He was very, very quick to just go with the kill everybody option, which, if you're a Jedi, that's not what you want to be trying to do. Now, he does, of course, come around by the end of the episode, particularly when the mission blows up in his face. The Phantom gets destroyed. He himself almost gets killed. And as is pointed out by Sabine, hey, these ships aren't fueled. They don't, and then later it turns out they don't have hyperdrive. Ezra really did fail very badly as a leader, and Hera, never mind disobeying orders, was pretty well in the right to suspend him for that. And in all fairness, Ezra did seem to understand that he'd screwed up and was willing to sort of take responsibility for it. Now, what to me was really interesting was what was going on with Kanan. From what we see here, it looks like he's been very much in kind of a funk or state of depression since losing his sight, which is, of course, perfectly understandable. He's got this face plate on his face, which actually makes him look kind of like Mira Luca, which, interestingly enough, if I remember correctly, was a alien species introduced in Knights of the Old Republic 2 with the character of Visas Mar, who was also a really, really cool character. But anyway, so here he ends up meeting this character, the Bendu. Now, if you know your Star Wars lore, when George Lucas was originally writing the stories, the original name for the Jedi Knights was going to be the Bendu Monks. So here they're just sort of recycling this name that never got used. Now, the Bendu himself is voiced by Tom Baker. Now, this is, of course, the guy best known for playing the Fourth Doctor on Doctor Who. Tom Baker is my absolute favorite Doctor. I love the Fourth Doctor. He is fantastic. He was my first Doctor. So I come into that from that. But still, this is, of course, not the first time somebody from Doctor Who has been on the show. David Tennant popped up doing the voice of a robot. I should say a droid a while back, which is very cool. And, Tom Baker, of course, does a really, really great job. And what I like is that the Bendu, the way he approaches all of this, it is very similar in a lot of ways to the sort of training that Jedi get. And of course, if you're familiar with Eastern philosophy, the Jedi crib pretty heavily from Buddhism. and that whole stuff where he's talking, the Bendu is telling Kanan to be empty. Now, in Buddhism, emptiness is a huge, huge, huge thing, and exactly what is meant by emptiness is kind of complex. Well, let's put it this way: it's beyond what's really needed to be here in this review of a Star episode of a Star Wars cartoon. Let's put it that way. But what he's saying to Kanan in terms of be empty is really really pretty much right on the money with what they're going for in Buddhism. And the whole thing about sensing these feelings and ultimately looking within yourself, again, very very much right out of the Buddhism playbook. And of course, when Kanan does all of this and realizes this fear is coming from within him, again, that's sort of what meditation in Buddhism and of course other religions that practice meditation are intended to bring out. And so basically, it was really just a case of search your feelings, as the Jedi are so fond of saying. Now, the Bendu kind of being someone who's in the middle. Now, of course, we have the term gray Jedi to kind of describe Force users who are neither wholly adherent to the light or wholly adherent to the dark. Technically, in this case, like Ahsoka would sort of be one of those. She's not actually a Jedi at this point, but she's somebody who clearly favors the light side of the Force. But anyway, that's again another thing that's really sort of outside of the purview of this video. Now, the sort of the role of kind of Force users who are in the middle has always been sort of very back and forth. Obviously, the Jedi did not hold such characters in terribly high regard. In fact, there's some of the older lore where the Jedi basically considered the Jedi Order to be the perfect expression of the will of the light side of the Force. And of course, that arrogance ultimately ended up blowing up in their faces. So I do like how this is a nice way of bringing some of the moral complexity of the Force and the light and the dark side back in there. And because as much as basically the Star Wars can at times be very very morally and very very black and white with its choices. Now, not always. There's been a lot of good stories where the murkiness of the Force. What is the light side? What is the dark side thing to do in a situation? And can you do the wrong thing for the right reasons? And again, this is very complex stuff that we don't really want to get into too deeply here because we don't want to get too wildly off topic. But I'm very intrigued by the possibility of just sort of them being willing to play around with this, particularly when you're dealing with characters like Ezra and even Kanan, who are, as the Bendu says, not really in balance. And the Bendu, you can kind of tell that he can just sort of be that where he is in between the light and the dark because he knows what the heck he's doing. But for other characters, sort of like Ezra, who are sort of struggling and oscillating between the two, Ezra's going out there trying to do good, wanting to help people, wanting to protect his friends. But as the Bendu points out, even that can lead a person down a terrible path. I mean, that's basically all Anakin wanted. Anakin really wanted to protect, to save the Republic, to protect Padme, and look at how that turned out for him. But anyway, I have a feeling I'm kind of getting into rambly territory here, so I think I'm going to stop. I just want to say that ultimately this is very much a setup episode, but it's an interesting setup episode. And I'm definitely looking forward to more of what this third and final season of the series has in store for us. So, with that said, I'm going to call it here. As always, please comment, rate, and subscribe. And of course, you can follow me on Twitter at Hoosier Jedi. And please also join me on Tumblr at Jedi Reviewer. Till next time, take care and have a good one.